What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, May 8th, 2018 here, and we have got so much to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to take your phone calls. Obviously, the big news, and a lot of people are very upset about this, Trump has just withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal, ignoring the pleas of the European leaders, the other members of the P5 at the Security Council, ignoring the will of almost two-thirds of the American people. And he was on TV with just this outrageous propaganda talking about the lunacy of the Iranian leadership and the danger of Iran having a nuclear bomb. This from the president of the only nation to ever actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country. So a little bit of irony and hypocrisy there. So now the deal is over and everybody's waiting to see what the fallout is going to be. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, has said that pulling out of the nuclear deal is actually going to embolden Putin because it reinforces his accusation that the U.S. is untrustworthy and unpredictable. And that is a real problem when you're dealing with any foreign policy other than foreign policy by conquest. Now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is saying that this move by Trump could easily lead to World War III. Certain it is likely to ignite a regional conflict all over the Middle East. And it was just a really, really bad idea. And what's really interesting is Congress continues to abdicate the responsibility, because when back in 1945, when Harry Truman wanted to ratify the UN Charter, it took a vote in the Senate to confirm. And today, the Congress just sits back and lets the president do whatever he or she wants, start wars, pull out of treaties, and the more treaties that the U.S. government pulls out of, the less trustworthy it is seen around the world. So it has a huge, huge credibility problem. All right, now, according to Rudy Giuliani, who I thought his job was supposed to be Trump's lawyer, but he's out there basically speaking on behalf of Trump, which I don't think is really appropriate for him. That's what the White House press corps is for. But he's basically out there saying that Trump is committed to regime change in Iran, just like Hitler was committed to regime change in France, only he didn't call it that. He called it invasion. Now, there's an interesting little article over here in Ynet News, Trump's Iran strategy, telling fibs and sowing fear, which is exactly what this morning's presentation was, where he's out there trying to make us all afraid of Iran. And I think probably the majority of Americans right now are more afraid of their own government than they are of Iran. Iran has a very long history of not sticking their nose into other countries' business without an invitation. And, you know, Trump has gone back and said, you know, the P5+1 deal was terrible. We should have pushed for the long-range missiles. But he's ignoring the actual history of what happened. You need to recall that Iran agreed to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action because they had already ceased trying to build nuclear weapons back in 2003. Therefore, the cost of the deal was negligible for them in the hope that they were going to get sanctions reduced, which didn't really work. In fact, Congress immediately passed more sanctions on them. But adding in those long-range missiles would have been a deal breaker because Iran relies on having those long-range missiles to hold off invasion. So that's where it is. Now, Israel is out there already banging the war drums. Netanyahu is saying that he vows to block Iran's aggressions, ignoring the fact that it is the U.S. and Israel who are projecting their power all over the Middle East without permission, such as Syria. But again, it's demonizing that potential enemy. Meanwhile, over in Tehran, their finance minister is out there. Actually, the governor of the Iranian Central Bank, Valola Siyaf, went on state television to say they've already planned for Trump to pull out of the deal and to throw more sanctions on Iran, which is what Trump says he's now going to do. Without the P5+1 deal, Trump can go on sanctioning Iran as much as he wants. Here is where that is likely to come up short, because Iran is still friends with the other permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, and they've already indicated they want to continue with the nuclear deal. So right now the ball, so to speak, is in Iran's court. If they go back to the nuclear program, all bets are off. But if Iran stays with the agreement, then they can trade with all those European nations and China. And they can ignore the US and their sanctions. And I think that would be the better way for them to go. Unless something dramatic happens, and that may be in the offing here. All right, let's move over to the Syrian war report. Apparently, there has been a deal reached in what's called the Rastan pocket in northern Homs. And right now, the militants and their supporters are evacuating and heading on out. And it's the evacuation is expected to be finished within 7 days. And part of the evacuation, the local militants handed over 6 battle tanks, 3 BMP vehicles, 2 Shilka vehicles, as well as mortars, anti-tank guided missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and other weapons. Gee, I wonder where they got all of that stuff from. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Article coming out of Fars News showing that despite Donald Trump's statement a few weeks ago about how he wanted to pull out of Syria, the exact opposite is happening. There is a massive buildup underway in Syria. The U.S. is constructing new illegal bases in the war-torn country and doing whatever it can to provide as many weapons as possible to their vassals, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, so forth and so on. The new Mission Creep base marks the latest example of America's growing and controversial war for regime change in Damascus. We're back to that. Oh, we got to get rid of Assad. We got to get rid of Assad. The war is a constant. The reasons for the war given to you keep changing with the wind. And that should tell you that something really bad is going on here. Now, this buildup coincides with an aggressive escalation by the Trump White House in their propaganda war against Iran. Now, Syria was actually that last stepping stone before they went into Iran. They needed that border area cleared. And so we might be seeing a major war on Syria to get rid of Assad, immediately followed by war with Iran. Now, excuse me. One way it might be done is with a false flag attack, because Israel is already out there threatening they will topple Assad if Iran retaliates over the recent Israeli strikes. As you know, Israel carried out attacks on the T4 air base in which an estimated 11 Iranians were killed. And Tehran said there will be a response at a time and place of our choosing, which is suitably vague. But Israel is out there saying that if Syria allows Iran to attack Israel from within Syria, they will go directly for Assad. They'll go for a decapitation strike. Now, we're seeing all these stories coming on out where Israel is concerned that Iran may fire missiles at them because of the strike on the T4 air base. Now, Iran really isn't going to do anything that dumb. My concern is that somebody may do it on behalf of Iran. And if you look at all the lies and frauds and deceptions that have been used to trigger war for the United States throughout history, you understand this is a valid concern. Mossad could fire a rocket from near the Iran border into Israel, and they could say, oh, the war is on. Israel provokes a war with Iran, and the U.S., because of prior commitments, comes into the war on the side of Iran, and then we really do have a major regional conflict that could easily spin out of control. And given the fact that Netanyahu is looking at indictment for corruption back in Israel, I think it's going to happen sooner than later, especially when you remember Netanyahu's comment about better we deal with Iran today. We don't dare let them wait. The world waited too long to deal with the Nazis, and which is technically true, if you remember Gordon Chamberlain. Now, Israel has been talking tough with Russia. They're threatening Russia, saying that if Russian provided air defense systems target Israeli planes that are bombing Syria, that Israel will attack those missile sites. A highly dubious tactic. You know, that's obviously the best defended site in all of Syria, the actual launchers. All of a sudden, Israel has done a 180, and they're doing a charm offensive, if you will. Avigdor Lieberman is now seeking Russian help to try and calm things down in Syria. And this dramatic turnaround, you see it a lot in Israeli foreign policy. This doesn't work, we try plan B, then we go to plan C. Israel thinks it's a smart move. Will it work? I don't think so, because Putin knows that, like the United States, anything Israel says today cannot be depended upon tomorrow. So Lieberman is now asking for Moscow's intervention to tamp down Israel's tensions with Iran. And the reason is Israel has painted itself into a corner with all of its bellicose rhetoric and its military action. It was actually taunting Iran to step for a fight by firing missiles at locations in Syria where Iranian military advisors would be present. And they finally drew blood on April 8th, killing Iranian personnel. Well, so now Israel's kind of in a little bit corner. They can't be seen to initiate the war, or world opinion, which is already much against the government of Israel right now, will be even more firmly against the government of Israel. So Israel was trying to provoke Iran, and Iran didn't bite. And again, war is not really in Iran's nature. It's been 200 years since Iran initiated a war of conquest against another country. And certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution that kicked out the US puppet ruler, the Shah. It's Israel and the United States, which can't seem to go for 6 months without invading or bombing or drone striking somebody. Now, speaking of Israel, of course, the Great March of Return is still ongoing, and Israel is inflicting horrific injuries and death on the peaceful, nonviolent Palestinian protesters. The government of Israel is trying to claim it's actually a war, and therefore international law should not apply. And Israel is justifying this with the claim that Palestinians are flying kites over the fence over Israeli territory that are carrying homebrew firebombs. That's it. That's the entire justification. And here's the part I think you need to pay attention. Look at America's corporate media. Look how obsessed they are trying to figure out, how President Trump paid off the porn star. They're obsessed with it. Stormy Daniels is everywhere, and frankly, I'm sick of looking at her. But Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, and as far as the American corporate media is concerned, yeah, it's okay. Those Palestinians, they had it coming. I'm still wondering when the corporate media is going to ask the obvious question. Did Stormy Daniels extort Donald Trump for that $130,000? I don't think Trump and his lawyers just called her up and said, look, you've been a real good person here. We're just going to give you $130,000. I think she asked for the money, and that is extortion. Anyway, back on the war zones here. Israel is continuing their war on the Gaza fishermen, and they're routinely firing on boats, injuring, killing, and arresting Palestinian crew members. And it all has to do with the fishing zone. Now, according to the 1993 Oslo Accords, Gaza's fishing zone was supposed to extend 20 nautical miles out from shore. But Israel never allowed local fishers that range. The furthest Gaza's fishers have been able to work since the Oslo Accords has been 12 miles out, and that was more than 10 years ago. Since Hamas won the elections and took control of Gaza's internal affairs in 2007, the limits were reduced to 6 miles, then 3, before being raised again to 6, the limit the fishers face today. Now, if you know anything about deep water fishing, you know that to get the best fish, the best food, you do need to get out there in the deep water. And this is just another way that Israel is imposing a slow starvation on the people of Gaza. But again, in the American corporate media, yeah, this is fine. This is perfectly okay. Let's get back to Stormy Daniels. We want to see what's going on there. Forget about the Clinton Foundation. Forget about the email server. Stormy Daniels is the big news here. Now, a lot of people are starting to wonder, why is NATO up in Afghanistan? Because on April 27th, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg issued an ultimatum to the Taliban fighting the U.S. and NATO allied forces that have invaded and occupied Afghanistan. Negotiate, meaning give up, or be destroyed. And basically, he's acting like a Reinhard Heydrich, the Nazi SS security general, making threats against the resistance on behalf of the warlords in Washington. Here's the point, though. NATO is supposed to be a defensive organization. They're only supposed to be active when a NATO member country is attacked. Afghanistan didn't attack anybody. So once again, we're seeing this rush to war, that treaty obligations and former understandings are just being discarded. They want war. They think war is cool. Reminds me of this scene from the movie Hot Shots Part 2, where the guy's out there and he's just saying, with this big gun, he says, "War, it's fantastic." And you just have to laugh at that. Now, coming into the category of the horse is already out of the barn, the U.S. came under serious criticism for providing Kiev with Javelin anti-tank missile systems, which Kiev obviously intends to use in the coming attack on the Donbass. Well, now the U.S. is out there saying, well, those missiles are really only for defense, and you're not allowed to use them for offensive operations in the Donbass. And of course, Kiev is going to listen to that restriction as readily as Tel Aviv does. Because in theory, all of the weapons provided by the U.S. to Israel are for defensive purposes only. But of course, Israel is using them to attack Syria, attack Lebanon, attack everybody around there. Now, out in China, it seems like Trump is just pushing on everybody all at once. And this is insanity. We don't have the military capacity to take on the entire planet right now. But that seems to be where we're going with this. The White House is now threatening Beijing with consequences if the missiles installed on those man-made islands in the South China Sea are not withdrawn. This is a sort of low-key replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they're not saying what the consequences would be. But again, the issue is that the U.S. is out there meddling on the other side of the world. The disagreement over the islands is between China, and it is called the South China Sea, and Vietnam wants to claim the islands, and the Philippines wants to claim the islands because they discovered there's a lot of oil and gas down there. But going back to the end of World War II, there was a treaty signed called the Cairo Convention that basically took away all the lands conquered by the Japanese Imperial Army and restored them to their rightful owners. Those islands in the South China Sea had been Chinese prior to World War II. Japan occupied them. The Cairo Convention gave them back, and all of the victor nations in World War II, including the United States, signed that treaty. So now we have another example of the U.S. just abandoning a treaty obligation in order to go on in and help Vietnam and the Philippines grab assets that the U.S. wants to share in, or at least control what currency they're sold in. Because that's the big issue for the U.S. If China is harvesting all that oil and gas, it will be sold for the yuan. If Vietnam and or the Philippines get those islands, the U.S. will pressure them to denominate the oil and gas in U.S. dollars. It's the same old petrodollar scam all over again. The White House is also accusing China for pushing domestic propaganda across the United States. Apparently, the new definition of propaganda by the U.S. government is anybody telling the truth and calling into question our lies. That seems to be it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a reminder again, for those of you who want to support Republic Broadcasting, and we really do need your help. We're not kidding about this. The address where you can send a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. All right, let's get back to the news here. Getting to the domestic politics, Donald Trump, I think, has finally located his presidential brass knuckles. And he's hinting at legal action against Robert Mueller's team, which he's nicknamed the 13 Angry Democrats. Basically, Trump has come on out saying that the 13 Angry Democrats in charge of the Russian witch hunt are going to learn there is a court system in place that protects people from injustice. And he's basically saying, wait till the courts get to see your unrevealed conflicts of interest. Now, in the good old days when we had a functioning federal government, if you were assigned a task and there was a conflict of interest, you were required to recuse yourself to maintain objectivity and impartiality. In the case of the aftermath of the 2016 elections, they went the other way. They hunted down everybody they could find that just had reasons to hate Donald Trump, and they went after him. And again, I'm very disappointed in Trump, especially after this morning. But we must remain a nation of laws. We must stay to that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And what the 13 Angry Democrats are doing is morally and ethically wrong. And I say that because had Hillary won the election, or if Mike Pence was in the Oval Office, I don't think the reality would be any different. It's just become very obvious that our civilian politicians are just there for show. And that the real control of this country lies elsewhere, several time zones to the east, I might mention. That may be the reason why members of Congress are just abandoning their constitutional obligations. They don't want to be bothered anymore. It's all for show. So Trump is talking about a court action, and he's starting to really talk tough. He's taking a more combative tone with Robert Mueller, and it's suggesting that the president may decline to cooperate with the special counsel's prosecutors. Now, as you know, Mueller wants to question Donald Trump. They've got a list of questions. Trump wanted the opportunity to reply in writing. Mueller has refused. And this is their last desperate play for Mueller to try and goad Trump into saying something that can be turned into a lie or obstruction of justice in order that they can just get Trump. Because that's what they're all thinking. But Trump doesn't have to say anything, because that Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination applies to us all, including the President of the United States. And I understand that the optics would look really bad and the corporate media would just rip Trump up for pleading the Fifth. But I think at this point, Trump has to do something. If he just sits there and plays rope-a-dope, he's going to be finished. He's got to gain the initiative. Now, more and more, we're starting to see judges start to push back at Robert Mueller. They've gotten fed up with his absolute lack of evidence and his stunts and his game playing. And when when Mueller was trying to convince everybody that indictments were on the way, he announced indictments against 13 Russians who worked for 3 Russian internet marketing companies. That was his first big reveal that the Russians meddled in the 2016 elections. And of course, the corporate media went wild with the story to mislead people into believing Trump's election victory was illegitimate. Well, the trial of these 13 Russians is supposed to start. And Mueller went in and asked for a delay. And the judge said, no, you have had all this time to put this all together. Either show your evidence now, or I'm throwing the cases out of court. Which I think they should be thrown out of court. They're all tainted. It's all tainted by bad prosecution. At one point, the Mueller team tried to tell the judge that they have secret powers which can't be disclosed even in a court of law. The judge didn't buy it, needless to say. But I mean, that's how desperate they are. They're out there trying to claim they have special authorities. We can't reveal it. It's national security. Actually, if I put on this ring and I stick it in this lantern, I will have special powers to get the president. Looney Tunes. Representative Lee Zeldin of New York has blasted Robert Mueller and his team of liberal hack lawyers, saying that if he doesn't have any evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, it is time to shut the investigation down. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and stepping back into the global war area. You'll probably remember earlier in the show, I mentioned that because of Netanyahu's pending indictment for corruption and bribery, that he might move very quickly to escalate conflict in the region. And boy, I hate being right all the time. Israel just launched an airstrike against a Syrian army position in the south of Damascus. Syrian air defenses destroyed 2 Israeli missiles. And once again, Israel is flying over Lebanon without the permission of the government of Lebanon and lobbing missiles into Syria from a long range off. So it looks like it's on, and what we may see is just the beginning of a massive campaign to just slam Syria and launch a war on Iran. And maybe they've just given up trying to lie us into going along with it. Maybe the new attitude is, once we get the war going, you won't have any choice but to support us. Remember, I posted this wonderful clip of Hal Holbrook doing Mark Twain Tonight when he talks about the insanity of war. And he talks about the slogans that are used to sell it. Even though the war be wrong, we are in it. We must fight it out. We cannot retire without dishonor, which is total BS. But it looks like that may be what they're trying to do. And we may see continuing attack on Syria. This just broke the wires, so we'll see what's going on there. Now, just before the commercial break, we were talking about how Representative Lee Zeldin is saying that if Robert Mueller and his team of hack lawyers have no evidence about Trump-Russia collusion, it's time to shut down the investigation. And here is a surprise. Our UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, came on out and basically just turned on Donald Trump and said that Robert Mueller should be able to finish his investigation. Every Trump donor has to be interviewed before Mueller calls it quits. Well, I'll bet she's not going to keep her job for very much longer. All right, let's take some phone calls. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, maybe if Trump hired me and you and a couple other your listeners, you'd know what was going on, because the guy's a buffoon, Mike. The attack started half an hour ago, Mike. The Israelis are bombing south of Damascus.
Oh, they launched the attack right after Trump's announcement. They you know.
Yeah. Isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
You know, Mike, I heard some of the Syrian air defenses knocked down a couple missiles. So
yes, they did.
There's to it, man. So, yeah, I mean, isn't it amazing? We support Israel and Saudi Arabia, who is wretched. The governments of these countries are wretched, Mike. Not the people, not all the people, you know, the extremist element of the country. But Iran didn't do anything to anybody. Neither did Syria.
No.
Or Russia. It's mind-boggling. Like, we support wretched governments, Mike. Like, I don't understand. Like, everything is backwards now. You know, like, up is down and down is up. You know, like, how much more of this crap can people go for? You know, I mean, you know, Macron must be freaking out now, because he probably thought Trump wasn't going to do this.
Well,
you know,
I know that all of the other members of the P5 and Germany did not want this to happen. They think the deal is just fine the way it is. Their agenda is basically saying, okay, we're going to placate the U.S. Iran isn't building nuclear weapons. They'd actually quit back in 2003, by the way. But, of course, Trump's agenda, which is driven by Israel, is to smash Iran into little tiny pieces so they are not a regional influence challenging Israel's hegemonic domination.
You know what's funny, Mike? Israel don't have nowhere near the oil as Iran. Now, if Saudi Arabia maybe has reached peak, say, because they've been pumping oil for a long time, right?
Yes.
Iran hasn't. They've been having all those sanctions. Remember, Russia's also didn't really have the ability to pump out large amounts of oil for a long time neither. But due to technology and you know, they're a number one oil and gas producer of the world, the Russians. You know, there's a lot of untapped. You would think the U.S. would be making deals with Iran. You know, Donald Trump's supposed to be a businessman.
What do we make deals with? That's the problem. That's the reason we're on a war footing. We've got nothing to make deals with. Our manufacturing has been in decline for decades. Even our weapons are now seen as overpriced junk, and countries are turning to places like Russia for their armaments. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. What do we have to make a deal with? I mean, look at the total indebtedness of this country. We're a failed empire. Nobody wants to do business with us because of the way the U.S. government does do business.
Yeah, it's just a shame. Iran did try. Like, it's like even though with the Russians, they all are trying, and we just keep stabbing them in the back, Mike. Like, I mean, when is Europe going to grow some balls? You know, like, I see Germany's starting to grow some.
Yes.
But Britain,
so is Hungary.
I don't think Britain's ever going to grow any. France might, but Britain, I'd say Britain's a lost cause at this point, would you say? Because they're part of that same group, I think.
Yes.
You know, it's a shame, Mike. Like, you know, like I said, Iran does have a lot to offer the world. You know, it's just a shame that we got to pull this crap, you know, and Netanyahu has been let loose. So I don't know what the next 2 days is going to be, but I heard there was some big explosions going on in South Damascus. So
yeah.
That's all I wanted to let you know, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for the information, and definitely we're going to be keeping a look to see if this is just a one-off attack or if it's the beginning of a larger campaign to just go on in and smash Syria once and for all and open the door to the war with Iran. All right. We're going to take a phone call from Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. I immediately when you said that Trump had stepped on the treaty and said it was no more, I immediately called my representatives in Congress, Imhoff, Langford, and Russell, and it was Langford's representative that was on the phone talking to me. I guess they have, you know, these little callers. And he goes, well, you know, Iran's been shooting off their missiles and testing all their weapons. And it's like, no, they haven't. I go, they've been making medical isotopes. Now, isn't that correct? That's all they've been making is medical isotopes. They haven't been making any nuclear bombs. And so I had called them immediately last week whenever it was mentioned that he was planning on getting rid of the treaty, and that if they could be a bee in his ear and say, look, they've been complying with everything that we've thrown at them. The only country it isn't complying is Israel. And
well, Israel's not part of that deal. Israel's not officially part of the P5+1 deal, but it's the U.S. that hasn't been acting in good faith and the spirit of the deal, because they did not rescind all of the sanctions, and in fact, shortly thereafter, Congress just threw more sanctions on top of Iran. And as Putin correctly observes, right now, no other nation on earth can trust anything the U.S. government says. And at this point, I'm starting to think it really is a waste of time to call your members of Congress, because they've abandoned all their constitutional authority, and they're just handing off to the president. Do what you want to do. Pull out of any treaties you want to pull out of. Start a war wherever you want to. We're just going to kick back and enjoy the money and the perks and the hot and cold running interns.
Well, hold it. We can still burn up their phones and protest, and then the thing is, they did not have any bombs that they've been testing at all. Isn't that just an outright lie?
Well, it sounds to me like he got confused between Iran and North Korea.
Well, that's what I was thinking, and I let him know it, that they don't even have any nuclear bombs or any bombs to set off, that all they've been making is medical isotopes, and that was it. and they've been allowing all the inspections. But maybe they're under some weird impression that they have something, but they really don't. But I think it's up to every American to burn up their ears and let them know how unhappy we are. I mean, we can at least do that. They can't pepper spray us. They might, put a watch on our phone, but so what? I mean,
NSA's already doing that.
Stand up. Well, I think we still need to burn up their phones and let them know how unhappy we are with what's going on in our government. So that's my.
No, you do make a valid point. It's time for us to get angry. To heck with anger management. We're all ticked off, and it's time for us to make as much noise as we can. And you're right. Unfortunately, all of these elites, members of Congress, Trump and his advisors, they're all caught up in this groupthink. They're all just saying to themselves, we can win World War III, it'll solve all of our problems, and nobody dares say otherwise. There was an interesting psychological experiment that was done many years ago, and it gets repeated in college psych class, and that is the professor will make a deal with all of the students except one, that they're going to describe an object in the classroom incorrectly. And then there's one student who is not in on it who will come on in. And all the students will say, vase, it's a lovely shade of green. It's a lovely shade of green, and it's actually orange. And 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, the student who's the test subject will go along with everybody else and say, oh, yes, it's a beautiful green vase. And that, unfortunately, becomes a psychological trap. And it doesn't just apply in college psych classes. It applies to people in government who just get caught up in their belief systems, and they just reinforce those beliefs with each other. And anybody who wants to keep their job just doesn't voice a doubt about what's going on. And so at this point, our foreign policy is delusional. The United States cannot win a war against the rest of the planet at this point. It's just not going to happen. We're going to lose this one.
Well, when things get so bad, I think, and you have said it in the past, when things get so bad, that what do you have to lose? Really, what do you have to lose? And when you could have made a difference a little sooner, you didn't do it because you were in hopes that somebody would see the light and they would start trying to do things to be friends and be happy, and yet they don't. All they're thinking about is theft and murder, evidently, and evidently they've got a bloodlust. But we've got to start standing up, and I think the phone is okay. I think we can bust. I mean, I kept it to one subject. I didn't go and put 2 subjects in there that I was unhappy with. I just indicated this really is a big one, and it is a big one. So I thank you for listening to me, and I really think everybody should have put a bug in their senator and congressman's ear. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
you're probably right. It's time for us to express our rage because we're being led on a course that will lead to the end of this country. And that's true not just of the war policy, but of the economy. We're in a huge, huge mess, and the elites don't want to accept responsibility for what they've done. I mean, ducking responsibility is an Olympic event when it comes to government. Anyway, getting on back to the domestic politics, apparently House Democrats have launched a new fundraising campaign with highly deceptive emails, basically claiming that if they got enough signatures on their petition, that Donald Trump would be forced to have the interview with the special counsel, Robert Mueller. The letter says if we can gather 1 million signatures, it will force Trump to cooperate with the investigation once and for all. That's completely false. Petition would have nothing to do with it. And it goes on to say we need to gather 1 million signatures for Robert Mueller to force Trump to testify. We're the only ones left who can help Robert Mueller. Also false. So they're already lying to their own people again. I mean, they're shameless. They've got no respect for the rank and file Democratic voter when they lie to them like that. Now, if you'll remember, the House has now released the unredacted Russia report. And among other things that are in there, it catches James Comey in a lie, because the documents show that Comey told lawmakers the FBI did not believe Michael Flynn intentionally lied about his contacts with Russian diplomats. Comey testified to the committee that the agents discerned no physical indications of deception. They didn't see any change in posture, in tone, in inflection, in eye contact. They saw nothing that indicated to them that he knew he was lying to them. And yet, of course, Comey came on out later and said, oh, yes, Michael Flynn lied. And they launched the witch hunt against him. Now, over at Judicial Watch, and boy, they're doing so much good work right now, the Justice Department has acknowledged that James Comey's leak of the Flynn memo to the New York Times was unauthorized. And Judicial Watch is asking a federal court to order the release of all Comey's unclassified memoranda about his conversations with the president. Because what it looks like has happened is Comey just wanted to do a gotcha on Trump, who had just fired him, and he took the memo over to the New York Times. That is still a violation of Title VIII. The fact that Comey had been fired did not release him from his obligations to protect classified information. He should be looking at jail time. And I'm sure he'll use the Hillary Clinton defense, I didn't mean to do wrong. But in this case, I think it's pretty obvious, yeah, he did. He wanted to get revenge. Now, again, over at Judicial Watch, they're suing the Department of Justice for the FISA court transcripts tied to the Clinton DNC dossier. And again, we're seeing this constant stonewalling from FBI, from Department of Justice, from everybody inside the Beltway. And let's see, anyway, just had to check a message that came on in. So Judicial Watch is having to go to court to enforce a Freedom of Information Act request from the Department of Justice, because these FISA court transcripts are not classified, they're not national security, but they could reveal that the FISA court warrants were issued on the basis of fraudulent information, meaning the Christopher Steele dossier. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We have another caller waiting on the line that we'll get to after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right to the phones. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. You have a great show, as always. I heard you talking about the Middle East. You know, I live in a post-Zionist world. I've said that we should have America-centric viewpoint, and that Mexico should eventually be our closest ally.
Yes, we've had that discussion before.
Yes, Israel and their Zionism, okay, they overthrew a president, Kennedy. They had involvement in that.
They had help, yeah.
Yeah, okay, we have to dismantle Israel. I've called on John Stoutmeyer's program that I would be okay with resettling Jews back into this country, because Britain and the United States...
Jeff, okay. Once again, you seem rather obsessed on the issue of Israel. And unfortunately, I'm not in favor, or I don't agree with you about dismantling Israel. It's an established fact on the ground. And there are a lot of people living inside Israel who are not to blame for what's going on. What I would like the United Nations to do is to do their job and enforce the Universal Declaration of Human Rights onto Israel and get their rogue nation back in line. I think Israel should formally draw its borders and stick within them. And those illegal settlements in the West Bank should all be dismantled so that there is a contiguous block of land for a declared state of Palestine. That's what I think is the best course forward. This idea of we're going to dismantle this country or we're going to dismantle that country, that's the thinking we're seeing coming out of the Beltway these days. We're going to dismantle Syria. We're going to dismantle this. We're going to break a piece off. We're going to make Kurdistan. And I don't think that's appropriate thinking in a nuclear age.
Michael, Syria has Arabs. Jordan has Arabs. Saudi Arabia, they're Arabs. Israel was put there. They were a colony. They were basically Khazarian Jews, largely. They were largely European Jews. You know this. But Israel stole nuclear material, and they had a hand in the coup d'etat of our president.
Yes.
They're an illegitimate country. I do not want them to get hurt. I actually like the Jews. Okay? It's the Jewish cartel, the Jewish power that I have a problem with. The Jews are a very intelligent people, and they've done a lot of good things for humanity. I would bring them here for world peace, and because there'll be no peace over there. They're going to use our 19-year-olds to die for their cause. They're not dying for America. America's collapsing, and our future lies here in the Americas with our people and jobs for our people, relief from the Federal Reserve debt we have.
Yeah.
Israel, we don't even need to even be talking about that. We need to be figuring out how we can help.
I mean, in his farewell address, George Washington, in his farewell address, warned us against foreign entanglements, and subsequent governments ignored that warning, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in right now. We're just going to have to let this whole system collapse, and then we're going to have to start rebuilding our country, and it's going to take a long time. Thank you for the phone call, Jeff. We're going to let you go. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with hour 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2, and we're going to take a phone call from Jim in Jacksonville. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'd like to mention the fact that it's my understanding that the Iran nuclear deal is not a treaty. Right now I'm looking at on the internet 6 things you should know about the Iran nuclear deal. The most important one is, reported by the New York Times, under the terms of legislation passed in May, Congress had 60 days to scrutinize the accord between Iran and the United States, Britain, France, China, Russia, and Germany, and then to vote to accept or reject it, or do nothing. The President can veto any resolution of disapproval. Congress needs 2/3 majority in each house to override the veto. So to put the deal into force, Mr. Obama only needs 1/3 of one house of Congress to stand behind him, which means it never passed a 2/3 vote of the Senate, and it is not a legitimate treaty. And it sounds to me like the legislation that was passed is quite unconstitutional. The Iran nuclear deal appears to be an agreement simply made between Obama and those other countries. And I don't know if everybody's forgotten, but there were top secret, or beyond top secret parts of the deal that weren't even disclosed to Congress. And one of those parts has been quietly disclosed by Donald Trump via his Twitter, stating that that deal requires that we make $250 billion a year, or $250 billion payments to Iran every 6 months under the deal. That's $500 billion
now,
a year.
hang on a minute. I think you're misreading what's going on there, because one of the reasons Iran went along with this deal is earlier U.S. sanctions had frozen quite a bit of Iranian money inside the United States. And part of the U.S. commitment to Iran was they were going to return that money in chunks based on Iran's continued good behavior. But I don't think that even happened as well. Anyway, listen, Jim, thank you for the update on the nuclear deal. Obviously, it's part of history now, and we're going to let you go. Get on back to the news. Now, Iran has already responded to Trump's announcement this morning. I know we keep going back to this, but it's obviously the important story. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is basically out there saying that Tehran has fulfilled their obligations under the nuclear deal, while the United States has never done this. And direct quote is that tonight we witnessed important historical experience. For the past 40 years, we've been repeating that Iran is a country that is committed to its obligations, while the United States is a country that has never been committed to its obligations. And at the same time, Rouhani said that Tehran is ready to resume all their nuclear activities. But there's a caveat. And basically, Iran's government is saying the country will not abandon the deal if the other 5 participants stay in it. And he went on to say, if we achieve the deal's goals in cooperation with other members of the deal, it will remain in place. By exiting the deal, America has officially undermined its commitment to an international treaty. Now, I think right now that's the best course of action. We know that those other members of the P5, they want the deal to go forward. Iran is saying they're willing to go along with it. The U.S. will heap all kinds of sanctions on them, and Iran will start doing business elsewhere. So what is that going to mean? It's going to mean sky-high gasoline prices here in the United States of America. That's what it's going to mean. And it's not going to stop Israel from trying to start that war. And apparently, according to this other story coming out of Haaretz, Israel has now opened their bomb shelters in the north of Israel, expecting a missile strike. I'm expecting it to be a false flag attack. So we'll see what happens on that. But everybody's pushed to the breaking point, and at some point, some world leader is going to say, oh, to heck with all this gamesmanship, let's just go for it. And that may very well be Netanyahu. Now, getting on back to domestic politics, as you know, the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page text messages have come on out, and they reveal a lot of these meetings with members of the Department of Justice and the FBI, and one state official, not federal, Eric Schneiderman, was there at a lot of those meetings. This was the Get Trump team, and they were meeting outside their offices, obviously, to have their little conspiracy to undermine the presidency here. And the speculation here is that Schneiderman was their insurance policy, because the President Trump can pardon anyone for a federal crime, but he can't pardon anyone for a state prosecution. So Schneiderman was going to be there to file charges and prosecute people in a way that Trump could not interfere with. That just blew up in his face, though, because apparently Schneiderman got hit with allegations, multiple allegations, not just of sexual abuse, but physical abuse, and he has resigned. He stepped down. He's denying that he did anything wrong, but he's saying that the accusations will not allow him to continue to function in his job as New York Attorney General. So add him to the list of sudden resignations of people who are abandoning the sinking ship. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, over at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton had a little panel that consisted of people like Jim Jordan, who serves on the House Committee for the Judiciary and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Vince Coglianese, host of Mornings at the Mall on WMAL Radio, and editorial director of the Daily Caller, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, Vice President for Strategic Coordination and Operations for the London Center of Policy Research, and, of course, Judicial Watch attorney Michael Bakisha. And what they're laying on out is they're saying the scale of this scandal is unparalleled in U.S. history. When it was Nixon, it was just Nixon and his plumbers who were doing what they did. This is a scandal involving President Obama, top officials at the Justice Department, certainly Hillary Clinton at the State Department, the FBI and other agencies to spy on their political opposition and to basically launder highly questionable intelligence from foreign nationals and use that to get a warrant to spy on Donald Trump and his associates. And when Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer spoke, he said, you know, that Robert Mueller's investigation is diverting resources from genuine needs. And that's another reason it should be shut down. Okay. Now back to the email server. Basically, the FBI took custody of the infamous email server that was home to Clinton's email operation from Platte River Networks in Denver on August 12, 2015. Then they took the server to their operational technology division to be stored as item 1B3. 2 months later, when an FBI special agent went in to pick up the server, he found out the chain of custody for the server had gone missing. Now, what the chain of custody is in order to protect evidence from being tampered with, when it is first collected in the field and it's handed off from one person to the next, their names go on a list. This person had it first, then this person, then this person, then this person. That list is now missing. And that means that at some point inside that operational technology division, the server was removed and then replaced, and the person who did that destroyed the record. Now, this is a major issue in any kind of a criminal investigation, but for something that threatens national security, it is catastrophic. So at this point, there's probably little of any evidentiary value left on Hillary Clinton's server. It has no doubt been scrubbed by now. WikiLeaks had another dump of Hillary email. This one, where she's Secretary of State, and she's ordering U.S. diplomats to steal DNA from the UN leadership along with their passwords. I can understand why she'd want the passwords. Why would she want the DNA? Maybe she's going to have it analyzed and look for medical weaknesses or something else that can be exploited. That's getting real Orwellian right in there. Now, House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte has called for Attorney General Sessions to investigate allegations that Obama's corrupt Department of Justice pressured FBI officials to shut down an investigation into the Clinton Foundation during the 2016 presidential election. My prediction is Sessions will do nothing, because certainly the impression I think we're all getting, everybody inside that beltway was tangled up in that foundation. Slush fund, tax avoidance, money laundering, whatever was going on. Look how hard they're all working to protect the foundation, the email scandal, Hillary herself. Now, over in, let's see, Alabama, Judicial Watch and the Allied Educational Foundation have gone to the appeals court trying to uphold Alabama's voter ID law. A lot of states are now trying to reinstate voter ID, and a lot more of them need to do it before November. And basically, the Judicial Watch came on in saying that the original court ruling, Visay versus Abbott, on which the NAACP based its argument to that voter ID discriminated against minority voters. The case was fatally flawed, unworkable, and contrary to precedent. And more recent studies have shown that, in point of fact, requiring an ID to vote does not discriminate against minority voters. It was completely made up so the liberals could get this idea going that illegal immigrants be allowed to vote because they are dependent on them to hang on to power. And they're aiming for that House this November so they can impeach Donald Trump. The Senate is not likely to remove, but they just want that impeachment on his record going into 2020. I have been an observer of American politics seriously now for going on a quarter of a century. I've never seen it this dirty. And it's probably going to get worse. Now, yesterday we briefly mentioned that Rosie O'Donnell might be in a little bit of trouble because she made illegal contributions to at least 5 Democratic candidates that are over the legal limit set by the Federal Election Commission. Now, the FEC rules limit individual contributions to $2,700 per election. And O'Donnell donated over $90,000 during the 2017-2018 elections to 50 candidates and committees. And yesterday it came on out she'd been using fake names and multiple accounts to do it. Now, a single felony charge for this type of election crime carries a penalty of 2 years in prison. If found guilty on the 5 counts already publicly known, O'Donnell could be going to jail for 10 years. And she ought to, not because I don't like Rosie O'Donnell, but because we have to start getting our election system back under control. We have to restore fair, honest politics in this country. We cannot go on tolerating or even encouraging corruption and fraud. It will ultimately destroy the country. All right, so let's talk about the economic news. Well, the news is not good for those of you with Obamacare compliant health insurance policies. The premiums may soar as much as 91% next year. And the largest hikes are being sought by Care First. They want a 64% increase in Virginia and a whopping 91% increase in Maryland for its health insurance. Other insurers are following suit in the two states, with Kaiser requesting hikes of 32% and 37% respectively, followed by Care First's HMO offering. In Maryland, Care First wants to raise rates by 91% on a plan covering 15,000 people. If approved, premiums for a 40-year-old could reach $1,334 a month, according to Bloomberg. That's $16,000 per year for an individual plan in a state with an average personal income of $59,000. It's just gouging. It is just gouging. Our healthcare industry is an industry. It's not about health. It's not about care. It's about making all the money that is possible. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. It's something like 39th in quality. And if you have not noticed, median life expectancy in the United States is now in decline. We're living shorter and shorter lives with all this medical care. Now, turning over to China, U.S. representatives have issued a series of demands in Beijing during the recent talks, ranging from an insistence that China take no action against U.S. measures undermining its development of high-tech industries to the impossible ultimatum that it cut its trade surplus with the U.S. by $200 billion within 2 years. Now, these demands are not intended as the basis for negotiations, but to escalate the economic conflict and military tensions. I'm sure that China would love to have a trade balance. We don't make anything they want. They don't want our GMO agriculture, and most of the stuff of modern life they make for themselves. Basically, the U.S. demands amount to a call for unilateral Chinese economic disarmament ahead of a potential trade war. So again, provoking around the world. Trump is throwing his weight around. And again, as I said earlier in the show, they're stuck. The reason the U.S. isn't doing business with anybody else on a peaceful basis, we've got nothing to do business with. Now, we're getting a report over from the Daily Coin that gold mining supply is shrinking. The existing gold mines are coming up with less and less gold production week after week. Now, for those who are already holding gold, this is good news. The price of gold is now going to go up. For those who are trying to acquire gold, like the New York Fed and JP Morgan, this could be a real problem. But apparently, some of the largest mining companies of the world are seeing massive reductions in gold production. Most of them were already operating right on the edge. Most people's idea of a gold mine is you go on in, the gold is all over the ground, you grab it, you put it in the bag, you go to the bank. No, those days are long gone. Modern gold mining is to basically dig down, grab a bunch of rock, crush it up, get the gold out by hopefully non-toxic means, and the actual margin per ounce of gold that these mines are operating on can be anywhere between $10 and $20 per ounce, meaning it costs the mine $20 less than the price of gold to get the gold out of the ground. Now, on a large enough scale, that's a money-making operation. But if it gets any worse and they can't get any more gold out, some of these mines will shut down. And there are closed gold mines that were closed when the price of gold went down, or they simply ran out of gold. It's the whole history of the gold boom across the West. It was all over the place. Then it got picked up, panned, mined, and the mines went away. And unfortunately, a lot of those towns, like Coloma out in California, are dealing with the aftermath to this very day. Because back during the gold rush, the way you got gold out of the rock was with liquid mercury. It would amalgam with the gold and draw it out of the rocks. You'd pump it up, then you'd heat it to boil the mercury off, and it would leave behind clean gold ore. The only problem is there's still a huge amount of mercury down in the ground. Now, here's an article that came out of Zero Hedge. Why is Russian gas critical for Great Britain? And a lot of this has to do with both the tensions in Kiev and the impending Brexit. How would Great Britain meet its needs for oil and gas? And obviously, with Russia being the largest producer, Great Britain would like to somehow tie into the Nord Stream 2, or the eventual Nord Stream 3 pipeline, because Great Britain, like Europe, doesn't want to be held hostage to the pipeline that is currently running through Ukraine, which is a place of tremendous turmoil. So basically, the Skripal poisoning hoax has driven a massive political wedge between the UK and Russia, but they're trying to work past that. By the way, somebody trolled Theresa May with billboards saying, "Why has nobody been arrested in the Skripal case?" We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And to step back to the situation in the Middle East, Israel is now sending military forces to the border with Syria, claiming that they have detected unusual movement of Iranian forces inside Syria. And they've opened up the bomb shelters in the northern part of Israel, and basically they're calling up the reserves. So it looks like it's on. There's going to be some kind of a big bang that will be blamed on the Iranian forces in Syria, and there's going to be a big launch. It's on, for real. It really is. Man. All right, getting on back to the economic news here. Venezuela, which is struggling, they've had decades of economic war has been waged on them by the United States, including one attempted outright coup against Hugo Chavez. They're still trying to rebuild their economy with their cryptocurrency. And as you know, about a week ago, they made an offer to India, a really good offer, that they would sell oil to India at a 30% discounted rate as long as India would use Venezuela's cryptocurrency, the petro. Well, now Venezuela has started a binational bank with Palestine based on the petro. And they've got a business council is being agreed on to try and coordinate. And of course, this is going to make the Federal Reserve very angry. It's going to make the U.S. very angry. It's going to make Israel very angry. Now, Warner Music Group has announced that it has sold around 75% of its shares in Spotify. This translates to approximately $400 million. And CEO Stephen Cooper said $300 million would go to shareholders and artists, which is a good thing when artists get paid for their work. I think the reason Warner Music may be getting out of Spotify is there are still 2 pending lawsuits over the fact that Spotify was using music collected from the internet without permission, and that even included some of Claire's music. And there's supposedly this class action lawsuit that's been on hold for months. But Spotify may be in serious, serious trouble. Let's turn to the world of immigration and globalism and all this other stuff here. Down in Texas, in Fort Bend County rather, an illegal immigrant has been sentenced to life in prison for continuous child sexual abuse. Apparently, this was a child under the age of 14, and apparently he just was using this child for a very, very long period of time. And so they put him away for life, which I think is good. But it underscores that people are just being allowed into this country without any vetting whatsoever. And for the open borders people, it's, oh, well, so this one kid got abused. I mean, really, it happens all the time, especially in Washington, D.C. Why are you making such a fuss of it? Now, Israel has been accusing Germany of a rise in anti-Semitic crimes. Germany has responded and said, no, in point of fact, the German people are just as calm as they ever were. And they've come on back and said that the attacks on Jews in Germany are being committed by the refugees coming in from the Middle East who have ancestral reasons for animosity. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Bill in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Michael. Couple things. You were talking about precious metals and the fact that, gold is difficult to get out of the ground. I get a financial newsletter. I think it's Investment Rarities by Jim Cook. But he points out how Jamie Dimon has been shorting the silver market for quite some time, holding the price down, while at the same time acquiring a great deal of physical silver. And he's figuring, along with a guy by the name of Theodore Butler, that Diamond has 700 million ounces of silver.
That's
They're
a lot of
waiting
silver.
For the price to go up, especially if we have a collapse. So I think that's interesting. The other item, you said that Hillary was, they were getting her DNA, is that correct?
No. Hillary ordered diplomats working for her when she was at the State Department to get the DNA of the United Nations leadership.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I was thinking that if it's her DNA, maybe they were going to clone about 6 copies.
Oh, heaven. The girls from
wouldn't that
Massachusetts,
be nice, huh?
yes. That would be terrible.
Yeah, that's all I got. Good
Okay.
show.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. And I just had somebody write in and request that I repost All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, so that's now going up on the main page here. We're going to take another break for commercials. I'm going to try and get some more information about what's going on over in Syria, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over at CNN, they've already got a story up about how unnamed U.S. officials are convinced Iran is about to attack Israel. So they're out there with the bovine excrement mortars, just flinging it at us as hard as they can. And they're almost telegraphing there's going to be some kind of a false flag that will make Iran look like the bad guy. And again, to find out if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. Now, I know that Israel did attack that T4 airbase and kill 11 Iranians. But do you really think the government of Iran is going to risk all-out war with nuclear-armed Israel and nuclear-armed United States over this matter? I don't think so. Remember, Iran is not a warlike country. They just want to be left alone. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution that deposed the U.S. puppet, the Shah. They just want to live in peace. It's a very beautiful country. It's the U.S. and Israel that are pushing this war agenda forward. It's like Game of Thrones on meth. All right, getting on back to Europe and immigration here. Tor Rasmussen is a prominent figure of the anti-immigration movement, Generation Identity. He's Norwegian, and he's become yet another activist banned from entering Great Britain for committing nothing but a thought crime. He was denied entry to Great Britain because he's got the wrong values. And apparently his wrong values are seen as a serious threat to Great Britain. So, boy, Orwell was right. Orwell was absolutely, absolutely right. We are there. Got a little late, but we're there. Apparently, protests against the Greek government and the European Union's migration policy took place on the Greek island of Lesbos last week. The Greeks are angry with the 2016 EU-Turkey deal that has left thousands of asylum seekers stranded on the island. And it's causing the same kind of problems we're seeing all over Europe and the United States with this mass migration. Now, it was just yesterday we were talking about how this rape case up in Sweden, the police were refusing to issue a description of the suspects. And it turns out that this is very official. And obviously debates about immigration and crime are a hot topic up there in Sweden. But nobody can find the data to relate ethnic groups to crime, and that's because Sweden doesn't keep those. Sweden, by policy, does not keep a list of what ethnicities are committing what crimes. It wasn't always that way. 10 years ago, yes, when somebody committed a crime, their ethnicity would be included in the record. Now it's verboten. Because yes, there's crime everywhere, and Sweden's now the rape capital of the world, but we can't let that stand in the way of our noble vision of a one world government and a one world private central bank. We're just too close. We're almost there. Okay, over in Ohio, there is a candidate, Christina Hagan, Make America Great, her campaign poster. She's posed there with a firearm, and she's endorsing what's called the Gosar Plan from Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, basically clarify the law that criminal foreigners are eligible for deportation out of the United States. And I think that's a very good idea. Why should we be spending our money to deal with criminal foreigners? It's not our problem. It shouldn't be our problem. If we had a reasonable immigration policy, it wouldn't be our problem. And Hagan has been endorsed by the National Rifle Association. By the way, the NRA's last convention, they had all-time record of attendance. I'm a little concerned about Lieutenant Oliver North being the new president of the NRA. Better start checking those closets for piles of cocaine. Over in Great Britain, the House of Lords is proposing an amendment to the European Union withdrawal bill to basically erase the mandatory exit date. Now, under the current Brexit withdrawal bill, March 29th of next year is the date where the Great Britain leaves the Brussels clubs, and Labour is trying to basically leave that open-ended. So they can keep saying, well, it's a few more years down the road. It's a few more years down the road. It's a few more years down the road. I can understand why the British people are very upset with the House of Lords. They're just the rich people. And they have their own house and they have a voice in government. And for the most part, they're very disconnected from the voters. They're doing what's best for their own business interests. Now, over in Brussels, they are already issuing demands to Germany to pay more to the EU to make up for the lost revenues from Great Britain. And we all knew this was going to be an issue. When Britain started talking about the Brexit, I said, the problem for Brussels is that right now, Great Britain and Germany are basically holding up the rest of the EU economically as they get strangled by the predatory practices of the European Central Bank. So now the EU is demanding Germany start paying more, and I'm sure the German taxpayers are not going to be happy about that. In fact, apparently, German ministers are getting ready to reject a move to prop up the entire Eurozone. And this has brought Germany and France basically at odds. Emmanuel Macron is calling for greater integration with a single Eurozone budget and a single Eurozone debt and a Eurozone finance minister. They want to pool the Eurozone debt and say everybody is equally liable for it. But the German ministers are saying, no, we're not going to do that because it's not advantageous for us. So Merkel will suffer a political hit for that. All righty. Theresa May, boy, a lot of tough stuff going on for her. Apparently, the Conservative Party is severely fractured right now over a future customs relationship with the EU. And it is so severe, it could result in the end of Theresa May's career as Prime Minister. A lot of fragmentation going on over there. Down in France, A lot of protests going on down there as well. And things were not helped when Emmanuel Macron's spokesman referred to Macron as a king. Now, it was a statement that was based on a literary reference, but it prompted a Twitter firestorm. And the literary reference was the fact that the French people, prior to the French Revolution, believed that the touch of the king could heal them. And one Twitter user mocked the article saying, if he could, for starters, heal the empty wallets. So this discontent is all over the world. By the way, over there in our good friend Saudi Arabia, and our good friend Mohammed bin Salman, he's still beheading dissidents. But he's the good guy. The Romanian president, Klaus Iohannis, is demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Viorica Dancila against the backdrop of the state budget deficit. Apparently, the economy is not being handled well in Romania, and so that's creating a crisis in their government. And the president is saying, mostly we have an unsatisfactory evolution of public finances, and the deficit reached 4.46 Romanian lei, which is about $1.14 billion in the first 3 months of this year. So Romania is having problems as well. I can't think of a single country on this planet where things are running great right now. Now, over in Hungary, who really are standing up to the EU, one of their members of the European Parliament has basically ripped into the European Union, claiming that the Brussels bloc has put itself in danger, as he warned Hungary will offer an alternative to the hyper-liberalism that is running Europe today. Everyone's getting really tired of all the liberalism because they keep making these horrendous mistakes. They form policies based on wishful thinking, and they're not really doing good analysis. Now, Hillary Clinton has been recently down in Australia, and while she was visiting in New Zealand, she made a comment that she'd briefly thought about permanently relocating to New Zealand after losing the 2016 election. I'm pretty sure the New Zealanders are glad she did not. But she took the opportunity to go on out there and start rattling sabers about China's alleged meddling in Australia. Oh my goodness, China's coming down here to meddle. That's why they've armed and fortified those islands in the South China Sea. It's a stepping stone from China to Australia. They're coming to get you. Be afraid, be afraid. And she's saying basically China is seeking to interfere with political processes in the region. Talk about total hypocrisy when you look at how the U.S., in particular the Central Intelligence Agency, interferes in political processes all over the world. In fact, if you want to talk about election meddling in 2016, it's come on out that President Obama was over in Israel throwing a lot of money around trying to get their elections to go the way that he wanted to do it. So it's another classic case of it's okay when the U.S. does it because we're exceptional and we're special. And we're allowed to do that because we're the moral leaders of the world. But anybody else does it, it's bad. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Okay, now, as you know, here in Hawaii, we're dealing with a volcanic eruption. About 35 homes have been destroyed now. Fissures continue to open up. The good news is the tilt meters are showing that the rate of expansion down by that eastern rift zone is starting to slow. Mostly because all of the lava that was pushing up on that ground is now flowing out on top of the ground. So we're sort of backing off from the idea that there could be a major landslide. Can't rule it out. It's happened before. Cannot rule out that there is not going to be another major quake like the 6.9 that we had. But it's starting to look a little bit better. How long the lava is going to flow is anybody's guess. It's 25 miles from the Kilauea crater to this rift zone where the eruption is pouring on out. And I imagine that's a lot of lava backed up into those lava tubes. So it's going to take a while. And we're not the only ones who are dealing with this issue right now. Over in the Canary Islands, there have been almost 300 earthquakes rocking this Spanish holiday resort. And they've struck between the islands of Tenerife and Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands. And there's a huge submarine fault between these two islands. The wild card, though, is that just further to the east is the island of La Palma, which is home to the Cumbre Viejo volcano. And Cumbre Viejo, like Kilauea, has a subsidence rift zone. In the case of Cumbre Vieja, it faces west. Ours faces south. And there have been concerns because, like Kilauea, where our southern flank has actually moved in the past, so has the one on Cumbre Vieja by quite a wide margin. If there were to be an explosive eruption and that dislodge, we'd be looking at a mega tsunami event. And I know people will look at that and say, well, it's science fiction. We've never seen it happen. And that's pretty much true for most of recorded history, except for a couple of references in Japanese art. But we do know these mega tsunamis have happened. The geological evidence is clearly there. It is a reality, a very uncomfortable one that we need to deal with. Now, here's another case of the police just being a little bit out there. A former Atlanta police officer has been sentenced to 5 years in prison Monday for beating up a Walmart customer he wrongfully accused of stealing a tomato and then trying to cover it up. So this former officer, Trevor King, 49 of Stockbridge, was convicted on federal charges of unreasonable force and falsifying a police report. Yeah, I mean, if it's a tomato, you don't need to beat the person up. Give them a chance to show you the receipt. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Eric in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Okay. Your Venezuela story earlier with the cryptos, I think you mentioned that they were taking the Venezuela oil crypto or whatever coin they created.
The Petro, yes.
They're also willing to take many of the other. Yeah, they're also willing to take many of the other cryptos for their oil. So I just wanted to clarify that. In other words, they'll take Bitcoin
Venezuela or Palestine?
Venezuela right now.
Okay, well, that may be a smart move for them. My concern is that because cryptos can be so easily manipulated, that they might be weaponized and used against Venezuela.
Well, I'm not sure. Bitcoin, I don't think, can be weaponized. I think it's a decentralized cryptocurrency that can't really be manipulated. I've been following this. Well, you know me. I'm your Bitcoin guy.
Yeah, I know that you're my Bitcoin guy. And let's see. Yeah. All righty. I have to fix a technical issue.
Oh.
Okay. There we are.
And
go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know how a state or a jurisdiction can tell you what you can have on your phone. In other words, if you want to do email, that's what cryptocurrency is. It's basically an email transaction. If you think about it.
Well, I would love to see it work. I mean, I would love to see something work that takes the creation of money out of the hands of the private bankers, because that is how they enslave us.
This is exactly what's happening. Andreas Antonopoulos, who's I call him Bitcoin God, but he said this is it's going to be an extinction event for the banks because the cryptocurrencies are decentralized. There is no centralization in some of the coins. Not all of them. Some of them are controlled, but like Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin are not controlled. They're strictly decentralized, and they just trade from peer to peer all over the world.
Okay, well, listen, thank you for the update on the information, and we got to let you go. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
Okay, good talking to you.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones now. Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. How's Claire's doing? Fine, I hope.
She's doing better. She's doing a lot better.
Okay, great. Listen. Yesterday I was watching a documentary on the I want to change the subject a little bit. I was watching a documentary on the Russo-Japanese War.
Yes.
Now, let me tell you something. Japanese were tough cookies in World War II. Let me tell you. And let me tell you, President Truman had no choice but to drop those bombs on Japan because a land invasion, I guarantee you, would cost more than 1 million of American lives.
Yeah, but Japan was trying to surrender. Japan was already trying to surrender. As soon as Russia came on in with the Allies, Japan realized it was up, and they were sending diplomats over to talk about ending the war and some kind of a peace treaty, and they were simply not allowed in. The reason Truman dropped those bombs was to prove to other countries that we had these horrible weapons and were psychotic enough to actually use them. And that was, you know, America's big stick up until the Soviet Union acquired the same technology.
Yeah, I understand that, but, you know, Truman was morally wrong for dropping those bombs. I understand that, Mike. But he was politically and militarily correct. I mean, even though they were close to surrendering, but still, a land invasion, we're talking about men, women, and children.
Tony,
these people were militaristic.
Tony, if Japan surrendered, there would be no ground invasion.
Okay, I got you. I see what you mean.
Okay.
If they would have surrendered. All right. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right. I mean, you know, one of the royal family, Prince Kaonohi, I think his name was literally shut out of, you know, trying to get in to meet with any of the U.S. representatives to talk about, you know, we're ready to give up, you know. And the interesting thing is Japan had only one requirement to end the war, and that was they were allowed to keep their emperor. And, of course, the Warhawks said, absolutely not, absolutely not. The surrender must be unconditional. But in the end, when Japan finally did surrender, the emperor did stay. And ultimately, he devoted the rest of his life to botany, and apparently he was very good at it, helping Japan rebuild its agricultural base. All right, so getting on back here to the news, we're trying to get more information about what's going on between Israel and Syria. Syria is now blaming Israel for the strike near Damascus. Apparently over in Riyadh, they're absolutely delighted that Trump pulled out of the Iran deal because Saudi Arabia views Iran as a regional rival as well. So they would be just as happy to see Iran smashed up. But what Saudi Arabia doesn't realize is that somewhere down the road, Israel and the U.S. gun sights will be on them to break them up into little tiny pieces. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with Hour 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And the situation is rapidly evolving. They are moving very, very fast. Syria is now saying that Israel carried out its missile strike on south of Damascus at a Syrian army base just as soon as Donald Trump was done saying the Iran deal was gone, at least as far as the United States is concerned. So the situation is moving very, very rapidly, and I did mention that Netanyahu would want to move rapidly because he's facing indictment for bribery and corruption in his home country, and nothing will distract the public and the media more than the threat of impending war. So they're out there, they're putting more troops on the border with Syria, especially around that precious Golan. Israel does not want to give that back. So now, getting on to other subjects here. As you know, lately, a lot of parents all across the country have become very alarmed at the sex education curriculum being adopted by the schools, in that it apparently illustrates certain sexual behaviors the parents find highly objectionable. And it's one of the areas in which we're beginning to see this fight over who actually has rights to the child, the biological parents or adoptive parents or the state. And this has been a liberal agenda going all the way back to Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village, which was basically the foundation for this idea that the state should make all decisions regarding the child and the parents have no say. Now, there's a lot of LGBT stuff being taught in the classroom to children who are still very much in their formative years and may not really have figured themselves out yet. So I think it's psychologically dangerous. Now, most places, parents are allowed to opt their child out of the sex education courses. But apparently, over in California, their parents are being told, no, you're not allowed to opt your kid out. The parents are being told to stand down. Now, this sex educational toolkit they're all using is funded in part by the George Soros-connected Tide Center, which offers kids tips on how to use sex toys and lubricant. There are things in here I can't even say on the air. But parents are very upset, and I understand why they're upset. I think there are certain areas in which parents should have control. Sex education is definitely one of them. Vaccines are definitely another. But the government, the liberals, are definitely going the other direction. We decide what medications your child gets, no matter how much they cost you. We decide what your child needs to know, and we decide what your child should not know. Big part of what Common Core was all about. Our children are not receiving a good education, meaning that they don't come out of those schools with good skills to move into the future. U.S. literacy rates, especially math literacy, are in decline against the rest of the industrialized world. Our next generation up and coming are unable to compete in the global marketplace. And that may be another reason the U.S. government feels it's in a corner and needs a war to sort things out and restore the natural order of things, which is the United States as the greatest nation on earth. This is going to end very, very badly. I hate to say it, it's going to end very, very badly. And I want to go back to that caller we had in the first hour. Yeah, go ahead and burn up the phones of your members of Congress. Not that they'll do anything, but we need to let them know we're very angry with the direction this country is going. And more than that, we need to let the rest of the world know that we, the American people, do not support what's going on. Now, back during World War II, there was a phenomenon called the Good German. And that was meant to describe the people of Germany who knew something bad was going on, but they chose to stay silent in the hope that they would be left alone, that nothing bad would happen to them personally. And of course, they wound up losing their entire country. We can't afford that same mistake because of the Good German phenomenon. That was the foundation of this idea that all German people from then until now, including Germans who were not even alive when World War II happened, somehow share the collective guilt. And I don't want to see future generations of Americans caught in that same lie. For one thing, future generations of Americans had no control over what's going on. Even we don't have any control over what's going on with our rigged election systems. And also, I don't believe in the concept of shared guilt. I'll accept responsibility for those things I have control over, but for nothing else. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. More sad news from the worlds of computers. Apparently, Equifax has finally revealed the full details of that monstrous cyber heist of all of its servers. And they got the cyber criminals got 146 million names, 146 million dates of birth, 145 million social security numbers, 99 million addresses, and 209,000 payment cards. There were also 38,000 America's driver's licenses and 3,200 passport details lifted as well. We have allowed too much of our private lives to be put on these computers, and it's time to pull back. Of course, Claire and I have never been eager to share our information. We've been paying off our credit cards and then cutting them up. We don't use the little supermarket drugstore discount cards because we don't want people tracking us. We don't want to be in those computers because these corporations that are creating these data banks, they're not taking responsibility for the security of your data. They just want to make money. They just want to make money, harvest all this data, sell it to whoever they can legally sell it to, and they don't care if people are breaking in and stealing it. Cybercrime has become big business. We're not talking about little kiddies in their parents' basement with a JavaScript kit just going on out there and being mean. We're talking about organized crime. Now, apparently there is a new WhatsApp text bomb that could crash your phone, and this message causes iPhone and Android handsets to freeze. It's being spread by messages sent by WhatsApp and comes in two varieties. One reads, "This is very interesting," with a crying while laughing emoji, followed by "read more." Tapping on "read more" will lock your handset up. Another message features a black dot and contains the words, "If you touch the black dot, then your WhatsApp will hang." Playing to the dummies out there, clicking on the black dot causes the crash to occur. And apparently the code that does this is being shared on Pastebin, meaning anybody can find it, copy and paste it. So if you have this text bomb, delete the message. Don't click on the message, delete the entire conversation. Now, what is going on here? Is this just somebody just being malicious for the sake of being malicious? Or is it somebody who wants WhatsApp to go out of business so they can push a competing product? I would tend to think the latter. And I know I'm being a cynic, but no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. Okay, we're going to go to the phones now. Nancy in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm calling to comment on what you said about the good German.
Yes.
And from what I understand, Hitler was resisting and fighting the bankers.
Yes.
So it always kind of surprises me when I hear you, that comment, for instance, makes it sound as though he was doing a wrong thing. I think he was doing the right thing.
I think he wanted to do the right thing, but he was maneuvered by Great Britain and the U.S. into doing the wrong thing. And the point I was making here was not about the German government, but about the German people's unwillingness to face up to the direction their country was going after it started going in the wrong direction. And because of it, they lost their entire country.
I don't know what... So I didn't live back then, but let's say, the way I look at it, he had traitors within his country. He had people that were subversive.
Yeah, they even tried to kill him. Well, his own officers tried to kill him. You
right.
know, we know that we know that Germany was. If you go and read that article, "All Wars Are Bankers' Wars," it lays it out how Hitler was basically maneuvered into starting an expansionist policy. The global Zionist had launched a boycott against Germany in 1933, I think it was. And it's kind of interesting to hear the Zionists today saying boycotts are bad, boycotts are bad. But they really wanted to wreck Germany's economy because it was doing so well without a private central bank. And then when that failed to work, they went on in and just figured out a way to destroy the place.
Yeah, and then he gets all the blame. It's really, it's probably, they love it. They sit there and rub their hands together and say, ah, ha, ha, ha.
Yes.
Our plan succeeded, and he's forever vilified, and what a nasty man because he wouldn't use our money. You know, I just don't want to fall into their pit of thinking that way.
Well, my point here is that the American people need to send a message to the rest of the world. We don't support what's going on. We don't agree with it. We have lost control over our own government because I don't want future generations of Americans to be told they have to collectively feel guilty for what the U.S. is doing today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I agree.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to computers. Apparently, BuzzFeed ran a micro-targeted pro-Clinton political ad campaign during the 2016 election without labeling them as political ads. They did not properly disclose this, and apparently this is according to a report by the Daily Caller. And according to the report, BuzzFeed ran 32 native political ads, meaning ads designed to look like standard articles, on the site in 2016 without disclosing they were paid political ads. And BuzzFeed had promised to add disclosures on native political ads when they launched the program. But the Caller reports that only 4 of the ads out of the 36 contained the proper and required disclosures. I'm the candidate and I approve this message kind of stuff. And by failing to disclose native political ads as such, BuzzFeed risks running afoul of Federal Trade Commission rules as well as Federal Election Commission rules. Now, it's for this reason that at whatreallyhappened.com, we do not allow native ads. We have a BBL, a big black line between paid advertising and the content. The content is selected by myself, the Lady Claire, the members of the site, people who email things in, and it's put up there, and we receive no paid compensation for it. I've been approached by people who want to have sponsored articles, and I tell them, no, we don't do that here. We want the readers to understand, when you're looking at an ad, it is an ad. And when you're looking at an article, it's basically somebody's honest opinion, as far as we can tell. Now, not too long ago, it was confirmed that Facebook's recent algorithm change is crushing conservative sites and boosting liberals. Unfortunately, all of these social media corporations are in the hands of absolute flaming liberals, people who believe that they have a right to just do whatever they want to do to get their way. They're not interested in a fair, open discussion. They're not interested in actually having an open debate. They believe in censorship. They don't believe in the First Amendment. Now, Facebook has been trying to say it's unintentional, but if it was simply a flaw in the algorithm, then the errors should fall equally on both sides. Just as many liberal sites should be crushed down as conservative sites, but it never works that way. The conservative sites are being crushed down, the liberal sites are being pushed up. Clearly, there is a bias being built into the system. Facebook, more recently, blocked the story on the FBI text that we had earlier in the program about how these messages revealed this group of DOJ and FBI officials meeting with this New York Attorney General. And people were sharing the story because it's an important story. And Facebook began blocking users from sharing the story, claiming it was a bug in their spam algorithm. Because so many people were posting the same content, it obviously had to be spam. No, it meant it was popular and it was important and people wanted to see it. And this is why I keep telling you, forget about Facebook. Forget about the big corporate social media. Forget about Twitter. Forget about Facebook. Forget about Google. And start going with the new up-and-coming companies, because they still are respecting the First Amendment. Places like Scene Life, Gab, VK, Yandex, DuckDuckGo. You've got to basically turn off Facebook. They're not the friend of the American people. They're the friend of the liberal elites. Now, over in Serbia, the government is appearing to make moves that would open the door to holding NATO legally and financially responsible for the significant spike in cancer illnesses and deaths which followed NATO's bombing of Serbia with depleted uranium shells. So President of the Serbian Parliament, Maja Gojkovic, drafted a resolution in Parliament that would establish a commission charged with investigating the impact of the NATO bombings in 1999 on the health of citizens and the environment, with particular emphasis on the effects caused by the use of depleted uranium shells. Now, previously, the Italian Parliament recognized that NATO's use of these nuclear waste weapons were the primary cause of illness and death for Italian NATO soldiers in the occupied southern Serbian region of Kosovo. So Serbian officials are in active conversation with the Italians, whose findings confirm the Serbian investigation. I hope they do that. I hope they succeed. These depleted uranium munitions are very vile. It's the gift that keeps on giving, if you will. And everywhere that they have been used, they lead to cancers and serious birth abnormalities, even including among our returning veterans. Talk about a stiff price to pay for service to your country. And it's just another way for the U.S. government to get rid of their nuclear waste problem by turning it into ammunition and making it some other country's nuclear waste problem. The only difference is, here in the United States, the nuclear waste is confined in cooling tanks, and when you use depleted uranium shells on another country, it vaporizes and it goes everywhere. It's absolutely horrific. They're insane. They're absolutely insane. Now, speaking of nuclear radiation, over in Fukushima, they've noticed that along with cancer diagnosis increasing, diabetes, for some reason, has increased sixfold. And they're trying to figure that one out. What's going on? Okay. There's this individual named Sean Thatcher, and he used to be a sales rep at Purdue Pharma, which makes OxyContin. And while he was a sales rep, doctors he visited often complained that their patients were developing tolerance to the opioid painkiller. And Thatcher, who worked for the company between 2009 and 2015 in Montana, was instructed to tell the prescribers simply to increase the dose and to clarify that addiction isn't the same as tolerance, or it was just pseudo-addiction. And apparently he received a bonus based on the number of opioid prescriptions written by the physicians he visited, with higher sales of OxyContin in particular garnering bigger bonuses. In other words, he was paid to push opium on the American people through the medical system. He was paid to do it. It's all about the money. Remember that story we had yesterday? Opioid painkillers can actually mean your recovery period from surgery is longer due to inflammation. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Earlier you mentioned that energy prices will be going up due to the end of the Iran deal. The one thing that you didn't mention and other people have not mentioned, what about the companies that went over there, such as Boeing, GM, Apple, and other companies that were planning on making a deal with Iran? I'm pretty sure they're very disappointed or even pissed with Trump right now.
Yeah, I imagine they are.
Because now you're going to see the European countries who are still planning on working with Iran, they're going to make a lot of money, and the Americans are shut out of the deal, which
That's
means
right.
Which means no jobs. I mean, you're going to have less jobs, people getting laid off. It's going to hurt the deficit. So, Trump might think he's doing something, but in the end, he's hurting his own people.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. I mean, when you go on a campaign of war, you're always bringing harm to your own people. And the idea is that the people somehow be convinced that the suffering and hardship is necessary for some greater good. And that goes all the way back to Sun Tzu and the Art of War. But our government doesn't have that.
I would agree with you. And this is the question in which I'm still trying to ponder. Why are people still supporting Trump? People that who are going to be hurt by his policies are still supporting him.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm believing the poll numbers anymore. I know Trump has a lot of supporters who don't want to stop supporting him because then they would have to admit they were wrong to have supported him in the first place. And that little mechanism, unfortunately, gets a lot of people trapped into supporting bad people. We saw that among Hillary's people. Even after all the stuff came out about the email server and the Uranium One deal, Hillary supporters were still out there defending her all the time because they didn't want to admit to themselves that they had thrown their weight behind such a corrupt individual.
I would agree with you. Well, Michael, that's all I have. So you take care.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Over in Colorado, and by the way, this is not new information. I saw this many years ago, but for some reason, it never got noticed by the corporate media. researchers at the University of Colorado have discovered that people who live near oil and gas facilities are at an increased risk of cancer. And these researchers from the University of Colorado took air samples from 4 separate residential areas in the Northern Front Range and analyzed the amount of dangerous air pollutants in each area. And their findings suggested that the air pollution level in the oil and gas facilities of the Northern Front Range exceed the limit set by the Environmental Protection Agency. And they calculated that people who live within 500 feet of a fracking well are exposed to 8 times the risk of cancer than the EPA is willing to allow. Now, as I said before, there was research that was done quite a while ago that said exposure to raw petroleum product or any petroleum product carries with it the risk of cancer, which is, by the way, at the same time gas stations went from having an attendant who would fill your car for you to letting you pump your own. But again, we live in a society where dangerous products are allowed out there with inadequate safeguards because it's making money. And that is fascism. Okay, let's see. Now then, a little bit of good news from here in Hawaii, and goodness knows we could use it. On fire on one end, flooded on the other. Mark Zuckerberg has announced he's dropping his lawsuits against the people of Kauai to try and force the sale of their inherited lands so that he could acquire them and sort of get them off of his 700-acre estate there. And it was a real point of contention, and he's dropping it. And he's saying, clearly, we made a mistake. Yes, Mark, you did. And he wrote a letter to the Garden Island, which is a local newspaper, and he said, their goal is to achieve an outcome that preserves the environment, respects local traditions, and fair to those with Kuleana lands, which means I think he's going to try and simply up the price until they voluntarily sell, which is an adult way to go about it. But for those who don't sell, they are allowed access across his lands to get to their land. And that's just the way that it is. Okay, we're coming up on another commercial break here in about 45 seconds. I'm looking around trying to find if there's anything more about what's going on in Syria and Israel and see what else is going on. I could use some phone calls for the rest of the show, 800-313-9443. Because I went through my talking points way too fast because of all the adrenaline and everything that's going on here. So let's see. People are complaining about Sean Hannity. Apparently Sean Hannity is out there saying Gina Haspel is a hero. Boy, talk about corporate media just carrying the water. Gina Haspel is a war criminal. Plain and simple. She'd be at The Hague, not the CIA. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And first of all, I've been informed by one of our listeners that Scene Life has unfortunately gone out of business, but the others are still there. I'm looking at the corporate media, and they're totally focusing on the primary races here in the United States. Not a word about what's going on with Israel striking Syria yet again. And I think the first that anybody will hear about the escalation of the war on corporate media will be when there's some event that can be blamed on Syria and or Iran, because that's obviously what's coming. It's like back on the Cuban Missile Crisis. The first anybody knew about it was when the Russian missile showed up in Cuba. The corporate media never told the American people that the Soviet Union had sent those missiles to Cuba in response to U.S. nuclear missiles being installed in Turkey. All right, let's take some phone calls. We're going to start with James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to talk about these marvelous success stories with Extendivite. While, it's all the components are terrific and everything, the recovery of heart function and one guy's story about recovering muscle function in his legs, I thought there had to be something more, and the thing is, with the, we sold, it's a long story, but I'll make it short. We sold these biological weapons to Saddam Hussein, or gave them to him. And then when we invaded, since the containers had English writing on them, probably said made in the USA, we wanted to get rid of that. So instead of taking care of them in a prudent manner, we used high explosives, which destroyed the English writing, but it also covered the surrounding troops with the bioweapon. And it's particularly pernicious and insidious because it takes a while for the effects to manifest. Mycoplasma was also discussed by Dr. Bob Beck, the original promoter of colloidal silver, and he was very forward-thinking because I believe this is a huge problem nowadays. He called them cell wall deficient organisms, which they are, and pleomorphic organisms, which means many forms, and or changing forms, and they have like over a dozen forms they go through during their life cycle. They are technically a bacteria, but unlike bacteria, they live inside the cell for most of their life cycle like a virus. And then when they break through the cell wall, they take a part of the cell wall with them. So when the immune system sees them in the extracellular space, they recognize them as an invader. But since they have that piece of cell wall from your own tissue, the immune system sees that tissue as an invader as well, and it starts attacking its own tissue. That's called a concomitant immune response, and this is the reason for the explosion.
That's why I was so sick those years ago, because I had mycoplasma pneumonia, and that one was nasty. Anyway, listen, thank you for the information, and most biological weapons to be useful on the battlefield have to be very rapid acting. And a big issue, they didn't just blow up the drums of chemical weapons. They had what were called burn pits, which was a big hole dug in the ground, and they would put unused munitions in there and set them off to explode and burn. But yeah, all the troops downwind were exposed to the residue from the chemical weapons, and a lot of people think that that may have been the cause of Gulf War syndrome. But of course, the government said, oh, it's just in their head, they're imagining it, and we don't have to pay for their medical care. Anyway, James, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, the Iran thing is on my mind. This is, Trump is just, he's woeful. He just, I'm not going to say we're, we might as well just add Hillary in, because I know she would have been even worse. But I'm telling you, we've been taking this man. He's either too stupid to be president, or he's a liar, or maybe it's a combination of both. As far as Sean Hannity goes, I'm not surprised. The man's he's a phony. He's always favors the establishment one way or the other, or he favors countries like Israel constantly. You think he was actually paid? Maybe he is paid by them to defend him. He'll never bring up anything like the dancing Israelis, of course. He'll never bring up anything about the USS Liberty. And by the way, callers, people want to once in a while call one of these radio stations like Hannity, Breitbart. I don't know, Limbaugh, whoever, Glenn Beck, call up and lie to them. Just don't tell them what you're really going to talk about, because you're not going to take the call if you're going to take. And then when you get on, ask them, start with something else, then ask them very nicely, what about the dancing Israelis? Or how about the USS Liberty? When you say Israel is our friend, and why don't you? Or how about the fact that Israel stole those nuclear secrets to get the bombs that they have today?
Well, they didn't just steal the nuclear secrets. They actually stole the weapons-grade uranium. That was the NUMEC scandal.
They really did that? I mean, where is this? I got to look that up.
Just do a search for NUMEC, NUMEC scandal.
Okay, and nobody said nothing about it after this happened?
No, because Israel's our good friend, and even back then, Israel just had tremendous influence over our government.
I mean, that's an act of war. That's not just, that's like with the Russian-Iranian deal, if it really took place. At least they bought it, they did their part. They bought it from us. The government is too corrupt. They do. But if the Israelis actually stole the uranium from us, that's an act of war. They shouldn't get away with this.
No, they shouldn't get away with it, but they did. Their first generation fission bombs were built with this material that was smuggled out of the United States. Now, an area of concern, of course, is that when the nuclear emergency search team was first set up, they were developing what were called baseline maps over major cities, which was mapping out the existing expected sources of radiation. So in the event of an emergency, anything new that had been added would stick out, and they could investigate it. And they discovered radioactivity coming from the consulate, Israeli consulate in New York. And Israel to this day will not allow anybody in to inspect the source of radioactivity or even admit that it's there. And the concern is, of course, once you have the weapons-grade uranium, it's actually very easy to build a fission bomb. It's basically a long pipe, and you put two subcritical masses of uranium at each end, slap them together, it goes bang. That's all there is to the little boy type nuclear weapon. And so, again, in an age where we're looking at a possible false flag to kick off World War III, we should be concerned about that.
Another thing, too, is if Israel and Iran go to war, if the United States doesn't get involved, personally, I think Iran would kick their butts. They're too big, they're too strong. If the Israelis tried to invade them, they'd be crushed, just like the Germans were crushed by the Soviets.
No, Israel's not going to invade Iran. They're going to start the war and then stand back and let the U.S. invade Iran. And ultimately, if push comes to shove, at some point, somebody's going to say, we can't win these wars conventionally. It's time to go ahead and use the nuclear weapons. That's inevitable somewhere down the road, whether it's against Iran or against Russia or against China.
Do we have anybody sane enough to understand what that would mean? That nobody's going to win a war like that. I mean, it would be, it would be the end of the planet. It could potentially be an extinction level event, maybe not immediately, but with that much radioactivity floating around the environment, between cancers and birth defects, we could see the food chain collapse. I mean, it really is an unthinkable situation. But we've got all these war hawks out there who are just standing around in a circle, reassuring each other that they can win a nuclear war. After all, they've got their very nice taxpayer-funded bunkers that they can go down into. You, the taxpayer, are, of course, not welcome. And they're dreaming that they will just go down there, stay down there for a year, come on back. The world will be this beautiful Garden of Eden, when in all probability, it's going to be a lifeless desert. I mean, at best, I think we could look forward to, the Book of Eli or the Road Warrior type of scenario, or even the, the Terminator type of scenario. In other words, where you basically got a lot of food. Or on the beach. I never seen that on a beach. I should really.
It's still floating around cable, and it's well worth watching because the director made this film on a shoestring budget, but it was at a time when people were very concerned about nuclear proliferation, especially after the Soviet Union got nuclear weapons and then China got nuclear weapons, and the idea that if everybody attacked everybody, it literally could wipe out all life on Earth. And so it's a very good film and well worth watching. If you see it, come across your cable box.
Okay, I mean, but I'm afraid that this is the type of scenario we're looking at if this happens. Russia is actually more prepared for this than we are because they got bunkers for their people, from what I understand.
Yeah, the entire subway system. The entire subway system is built to also serve as a bomb shelter. And when we had the ABM treaty, Russia chose to put their anti-ballistic missiles surrounding the city of Moscow, whereas the United States has deployed their ABMs around military bases. So all you civilians living in places like Chicago and New York and Baltimore and Los Angeles, you're on your own. Thank you. Good night.
Now, I really don't think even for Russian, even if they got those bunkers for their people, I don't think there's be anything to come out of those bunkers for. But at least they're trying, at least they're doing something. Yeah, they're interested in a few rich people maybe getting into the bunkers, some government officials like presidents and stuff, and that's about it. And I don't know if you saw this thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think it was a History Channel or the American Heroes Channel. Okay. Bobby Kennedy was told to take his family into the bunkers, and RFK Jr. was describing this into this, and he told his family, no, we're not going anywhere. We're not going in there. Because if we go in, there's going to be nothing to come out for once we go in. So if it happens, they should just stay out. And thank God, better heads were able to prevail. But I'm not sure now. I think Trump might be insane. I'm not sure. Houston, I don't think is insane. Thank God he's not. If he was, we'd be looking at mushroom clouds already, I think. But Trump, I'm really starting to believe it. He's either insane, lying, stupid, or maybe a combination of all. I don't know. But,
I think
he definitely doesn't seem rational.
I think Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is the real psychotic out there, and unfortunately, Israel does have an iron grip on the U.S. government, which means Israel is in control of America's military might. Well,
the president would tell Israel to stick it, and that would be it. They wouldn't be able to, They wouldn't be able to. There's still we could step on them like an ant. In reality, so a good president would stand up and say, "Oh no, you don't." But this guy, his son isn't, his son's criminal family, by the way. His father went to prison.
Yes.
Actually had Yahoo there as a house guest. All right.
Yeah.
Now he put a guy like Bolton in there on top of it. And the other, Pompeo, is no bargain. And Pompeo is one of these guys who believes one of the end of the world scenario that it's going to happen around Jerusalem, and so maybe he thinks, why don't we push it? And Jesus will come back. He'll come down. People like Pompeo will go up with Jesus then to heaven, and everything will be hunky dory. These people, it's not a joke. These people actually believe this kind of stuff. They actually put it in their minds and believe it. That's just so dangerous.
Yeah, it's.
You talk about radical Islam. You got radical all kinds of, especially the Abrahamic religions. Okay, they have this kind of end the world type. The Messiah is going to come. Everything's going to be great, but we'll have to destroy ourselves first.
Well, you find that in certain Christian sects as well. Of course, Christianity is directly traced back to
absolutely.
Okay.
After Christian Judaism and even Islam, when you look at the 12ers, there's something about it there that I think the Messiah comes back and everybody becomes Muslims and everybody will be happy. It's like I said. That's why I said the Abrahamic religion. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. That's what I'm talking about. And I guess you could say Mormons also. I think there's something separate, but they also have this crazy end of time belief there.
Well, okay. I got to let you go because we're running out of time, and I still got callers on the line, and I'd like to switch over to Steve Elkins. Steve, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm reading the email on Hillary's emails being dumped and found out that ordering U.S. diplomats to steal DNA from UN leadership, which had me thinking of definitely she was doing that to control the leadership or frame them in some way. But it also makes me wonder the third part with what she had planned. I wonder there must have been something really big brewing that she needed this evidence to keep people in control and frame them to go along with whatever she had planned. I wonder what she might have been thinking at that time. Any idea what at that time that they discovered that the date? Anything she might have been working on or some big plan?
You raise a good possibility that she could use the DNA to frame UN officials for certain crimes, or basically, rather than do that, just extort them and say, if you don't do this, I have your DNA, we'll commit a horrible murder somewhere in New York, we'll plant your DNA on it, which seems to be the level of skullduggery this nation and this government has sunk to.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder because she was definitely, that's the only motive you can have is to frame or control somebody, but there must have been, in order to frame them and control them, there has to be something that you want to carry out or cover up to do so. I think there's a third part. I'd like to know what that third part may be.
Well, the only thing that would make sense is we know that Israel has been developing genetically sensitive biological weapons, and maybe that they can develop some kind of a poison that's only going to react against a specific DNA. Would be the perfect assassination weapon. It almost sounds like it might just be Hillary feeling grandiose and wanting the samples of the DNA just to prove that she could get the DNA. It's hard to tell. I mean, I don't think she's necessarily 100% mentally stable. And a lot of what she's done seems to have been simply in the spirit of, I can do this. Anyway, listen, Steve, we're going to have to let you go. And we've got one more segment to do in the show. 2 more callers waiting online. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today, and we're going to go back to the phones here. Vivian in Canada. Aloha, Vivian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hi, Mike. I don't know if you've had a chance to see this story anywhere else. It was in a small Israeli newspaper I saw online that the people within the Israeli government are now talking about the possibility of dividing the remaining regions that are outside of Israel's control into 7 different cities. They're stating that the tribes, the Arab tribes, are so different from one another, culturally different, that they don't even intermarry with one another. And on the basis of that contention, they are suggesting that they should be divided into homogeneous communities, self-administered, while Israel takes over the rest. And they're talking about 7 cities while Israel continues to control the coastline. Israel has always acted very cautiously in the sense that its control has been incremental. It rarely does anything that is going to provoke a unified outrage that will prevent it from enacting its ultimate goal. And this idea of giving them self-determination within so-called homogeneous tribal areas, I contend the reason they're homogeneous and they don't intermarry is because they know they can't travel to visit one another's families. So obviously when you marry someone that's going to be close by. Israel has had such strict controls on the ability of people to move from one city to the next that this is just an excuse. And I'd like to make one more point. I used to believe that the idea that Israel was parasitic on the body politic of the U.S., I no longer do. Like a pathogen, it is no longer parasitic. I think it's symbiotic. I think the U.S. has become very much a partner of everything that Israel does. And it has even sucked in Saudi Arabia. They're destroying Yemen because of its oil and gas reserves. They want to take that over. And Egypt had better beware because it's going to be next, because there are a lot of resources off the Sinai Peninsula.
Yeah,
so I've said a mouthful. I will leave that to you to respond to.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to close the phone lines. We're almost out of time here, and there's a breaking story. Apparently, pro-Assad forces are currently launching flares over the Syrian towns of Ikeda and Tabia with sounds of shots being heard. And apparently some Iranian troops were killed by today's Israeli strikes. There are other reports that Israeli fighter jets are flying over Jordan airspace, and it looks like there could well be further air strikes, that they're really going to uncork on this. And again, this all started right after Trump pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and the timing is just too cute. And it looks to me like what's going to happen is they're going to go on in and flatten Syria and find some way to say that Iran was involved in this, and they're just going to keep on going into Iran. So what Russia will do, what China will do, what the other regional powers will do, I don't know. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are saying Trump's withdrawal was a good thing. So this is just crazy. All right. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm going to be joining him for about 5 or 10 minutes to talk about the volcano situation. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. Don't bother using Facebook or Twitter or Google or any of that. Use email or face-to-face conversations. It's time to bring back the sneaker net. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.